Hello and welcome. This is the work session of the Town Council and the School Committee, the preliminary, it's a public hearing, wait a minute, excuse me, public hearing that is going to be held this evening, April 14th, and again tomorrow night at April 15th. The time is approximately 7 o'clock. And what we're going to talk about tonight, first off, is that if we do talk, please use the microphone so the people who are streaming at home can hear us. There has been a request that we speak directly into the microphone, so hold your comment, pull the microphone to you so everybody at home can hear, okay? Notice how close it is to me right now. All right, so let's review what we're going to be doing tonight. Tonight we are going to be looking at the March 22nd approved preliminary budget from the Town Council. So under the charter, the public hearing tonight is following the approval of the preliminary budget. The council shall hold 2 public hearings on separate days on both the municipal and school budgets at which the school committee shall be represented. They are here. These hearings shall be scheduled and completed on before April 18th of each year. To inform the public prior to the said hearings, the town clerk shall cause sufficient copies of the preliminary budget to be prepared for the public distribution and shall arrange for notice of the public hearings and summary of the preliminary municipal and school budgets in at least one newspaper of general circulation in the town as directed by the town council, and posted copies in the town hall and on the town hall website, and as otherwise directed by the town council. At the hearing, all those desirous of being heard shall be heard. So that is what we are doing tonight in our public hearings. So I ask, before we can continue with this public hearing, that we not be repetitive or redundant. If somebody comes up to the microphone and states something, if you want to just say, I agree with so-and-so who spoke earlier, not restate what they said. If they have another point that they would add and be direct, I think that would help the meeting move along. So we're not talking about any of the school reorganizations or budget appropriations. This is just strictly talking about the preliminary budget. I'll review all the different points of the preliminary budget, but right now what I will do is I will turn it over to Mr. Alfred so he can give us kind of an overview of where we stand at this point with the budget. Steve?
Okay, in starting, I think it'll be important just to give, from a charter perspective, where we've been and where we're going, as well as what the taxpayers' rights are in the budget adoption process. As Kathy has indicated, the budget process is guided by the charter. The charter required the first meeting of the council and school committee back on December 7th of 2009 for the initial budget hearing. At that time, discussions were had as to what concerns were in the current year 9-10 budget, as well as forecast for the 10-11 year. The town council and the school committee also met on January 20th, specifically on their capital improvement program for the school fund, but also, again, had discussions relative to future budget developments. The town council received from the town manager on March 1st the town manager's recommended budget. Work sessions were then held during the month of March on the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 10th to review each of the different funds that are a component of the entire municipal budget program. The town council then adopted a preliminary budget on March 22nd. There are now, required by charter, 2 public hearings scheduled for tonight and tomorrow night. Qualified electors seeking adjustments to the preliminary budget with 25 signatures of qualified electors can file for petitions that would then be considered by the council prior to adoption of a final budget on May 3rd. If a petition is validated through the town clerk's office and the signatures are returned and the canvassing authority certifies them as being qualified electors, the town council on May 3rd would be required to specifically vote up or down any of the proposals brought forward. The council would not have to say yay or nay, but could amend or modify as they saw fit in advance of the adoption of the final budget on May 3rd. The public hearing is an opportunity for the taxpayers to comment on the budget as has been read, all those desirous of being heard shall be heard tonight and tomorrow night. I've had questions as to why there's two public hearings, and the time that the Charter Commission met, the Charter Commission was concerned that the public may not be available on a given night, and if we gave them two possible nights, it would create greater opportunity for people to be able to attend and be able to present comments. So that's the reason why there are two separate nights where the entire budget is to be considered. In fact, Charter Commission originally looked at whether they would have the school concerns heard one night and the council's municipal budget heard a second night, and they were unanimous in their choice that they wanted both budgets to be on the table each night for those two public hearings. As I noted, on May 3rd, the council is scheduled to adopt a final budget document with or without amendments from the preliminary budget. The taxpayers, subsequent to the adoption of the final budget by the council, have the ability to file for a referendum, and that referendum petition would require a minimum of 200 qualified voter signatures and require an adjustment in either the municipal general fund or school fund of in excess of $250,000. If the signatures were received on a petition for referendum, the referendum would be conducted on the Tuesday following the first Saturday of June, or in this year it would be June 8th. That's the budget process. There certainly is opportunity through the public hearings to be heard, as well as to submit specific petition requests in advance of the final budget adoption on May 3rd. I wanted to also take a couple of minutes to provide some information on what's taken place after last night with the General Assembly and the supplemental budget. First, as far as the supplemental budget is concerned, we had hoped that it would address the motor vehicle tax issue. It does not. Essentially, the governor's original proposal specifically deleted the motor vehicle tax program for future consideration and would not need to be a part of the fiscal 11 budget. The supplemental budget adopted by the House last night took a different tact. What they did is they left the entire budget in place as it related to motor vehicle taxes, but added one phrase that said that the cities and towns would receive 88% of what the total value of the program was in the 2010 year. Therefore, at this point, the $6,000 exemption still exists for next year, yet there is no budget appropriation. What that means is that we really still have no idea as to whether we will have to continue to exempt the $6,000 without receipt of state revenue, or whether there would be some limited state revenue that would be made available. Obviously, that makes a difference as to how the final tax rate will be set based on that issue. But there is no guiding light provided through the supplemental budget as it relates to motor vehicles. Second, on pension reform, and the pension reform that was approved last night, as we've reviewed today, suggests that the pension would be allow for COLA on the first $35,000. I think everybody's read that in the newspaper. The governor's proposal, which would have taken the COLA away in its entirety, suggested, as far as South Kingstown was concerned, I'll use our numbers, that if that change were made in the 2010 year, that South Kingstown School Department would reduce its expenditures for retirement costs by 2%, or $564,000. The objective was to be able to reduce the state aid to education in the 10-year by amounts close to that dollar amount. The way he got to the 2% was by providing for the COLA prohibition. The General Assembly, in providing the COLA restriction or limiting it to the first $35,000, certainly from an actuarial perspective, was not going to garner 2% in terms of reduced costs. However, the House Finance Committee forecast was that the COLA savings were going to be equal to $529,000, or approximately $40,000 less than what the governor's budget had. The way they were coming to that number was re-amortizing the existing state retirement system's debt for an additional period of time. They changed it from the existing 30-year, where they were going to start anew for a 25-year. That re-amortization would add about $2.2 billion in additional costs over the life of the 25-year reauthorization. That was a component as to how they reached the $529,000 number. And again, this is my interpretation, and I think Alan's interpretation as to what we see. If the Senate refuses to adopt the supplemental budget as presented by House and challenges the reauthorization, because the Senate proposal at this point suggests that they would like to see the aid reduction addressed with use of rainy day funds rather than the reamortization. What it would do is to have impact both on the amount of reduced cost for the school department in the 9-10 year, and certainly would have additional reduced reductions in what the 11-year budget would look like. So again, that's a wide open question at this point until we see, one, what the Senate does with it, and two, how that matter, if it needs to be reconciled, is reconciled. As of late this afternoon, we did not have word on whether the Senate Finance, I believe that they've continued that meeting today and are scheduled to hold caucus for the entire Senate tomorrow for a budget briefing. Where that's going to go from now, your guess is as good as mine. There are also in the supplemental budget no indications as to where the state aid base number will be for the 11-year budget. The reason that we can't really provide base funding estimates at this point is because the state is using the combination of state aid and ERA funds, the federal stimulus dollars. The range that we've seen on 3 different estimates range from a low of about $370,000 in ERA funds in the current year up to almost $760,000. The concern that I have is that the more backloading of ERA funds to reduce the state aid to education in the current year, the less ERA funds will be available in the 11 year. So when you look at it, when you look at the governor's supplemental budget and the governor's 2011 budget, there was about $960,000 that was allegedly targeted towards South Kingstown and ERA funding. If you take $750,000 of that in the 10-year, you only got the $200,000 left, $210,000 left in the 11-year. So again, we were hopeful that by this time we would have better indications, or at least foundation information, to be able to provide better forecasting as far as the state aid component of the municipal budget and the school budget. We do not. Other things that came forward with the supplemental budget. At approximately 12:30 last night, an Article 22 was added to the budget document. That provided for a 90-day extension on budget processes as an enabling act for cities and towns. Essentially what they're saying is that, maybe it's sarcastic, but since we haven't got our job done, we're going to give you 90 days to get the job done because we're not where we should be. There's a total failure to understand what the implications of a 90-day extension would be on a budget process. Essentially, if you look at it in its hypothetical, a May 3rd budget adoption date by charter would then become August 1st. The August 3rd adoption date would then have potentially a 4-week period to determine whether referendum would be necessary, which would occur after the start of the school year. So it makes little sense for anyone to assume that we can delay the inevitable and not adopt a budget, because in addition to it interfering with the need for the school department to make decisions on what their program will look like in the 10-11 year, it also means that we would not be on schedule as far as sending tax bills. If you were going to send tax bills in a September period, you would have November payments for 2 payments at once. You would also have the first 5 months of the fiscal year for both town and school purposes of expenditures without any income, which would then impact the investment earnings as well as the idle fund management. Why or how this came up, I'm not sure. I do understand that there had been a specific act submitted on behalf of Little Compton, and somehow that Little Compton Act became an article within the supplemental budget for the 2011 year. Another item that's within the supplemental budget, as adopted the last evening with House Finance, was that the maintenance of effort function, the requirement of the maintenance of effort on school transfer of property taxes, was reduced from 100% to 95%. That has budgetary implications on a $47,909,000 transfer that would be in either the 10-year or the 11-year of almost $2.4 million in flexibility that theoretically wasn't there prior to that adoption. There's also no direction within the supplemental as to where the state is going relative to the education aid formula. So that same $468,000 issue remains an issue. I do want to also caution that if an education aid formula is instituted, I have concerns that the dollar amounts that they forecast for loss may in fact be increased based on enrollment decline. The formula at this point suggests that they will use average daily membership as of, I believe, June of 2010 for the year of the 11-12. If that is in fact the case, and the enrollments are less than what they had been the prior year, which we know they were, then there's a potential for additional erosion of aid on a per pupil basis. We have also not been able to determine how this will relate to charter school tuitions. When I say charter school tuitions, I mean the local education agency's responsibility to pay the charter school for each child that they send. On a formula basis, it's been suggested, yet we have not seen it on paper, that the value could in fact be determined based on taking the transfer of property taxes divisible by the number of students inclusive of all of our enrollment plus the charter schools. That number would work out to substantially more than what is budgeted in the 11 budget at this time in the school committee's budget. Cost could be somewhere in the area of about 13.
The cost increase would be around $272,000, but at the same time, part of that bill is that the transportation would be paid for by the charter schools, so that would no longer be a South Kingston obligation. That's worth, what, around $150,000, John, for 2 buses? So the net shortfall is around $122,000 if that formula was to go into place.
But again, we don't know if it will, but we have aggressively attempted to get as much information as possible so that there's, I'll say, less surprises. Candidly, the numbers that we've seen on the 2009-2010 year with the supplemental budget, there was one budgetary estimate when it went through the House Finance Committee. There was a second budgetary estimate on what was adopted on the floor last evening, and a third budgetary estimate put out through the Department of Education. In contacting the Department of Education. They've indicated that they will provide for final numbers subsequent to the adoption of a budget by the entire General Assembly, rather than dealing with it at this point while they're not sure what the final resolution is going to be. So even in looking at the 2009-2010 year, when I had put my budget message out on March 1st, I'd indicated that if the COLA didn't go through, that there would be shortfalls in that budget, and if they did go through, there would be other revisions. At this point, I'm still forecasting that the school fund for the 9-10 year will finish at approximately a $350,000 to $450,000 surplus. And that's based on John's numbers as well as our best estimate as to what the revenues will be for the coming in from the state. But remember, and I caution, those numbers are based on the last estimate from the Department of Education showing about $730,000 coming out of ERA funds. If you get it this year, it's not available next year, so you need to save those dollars. So we've got concerns on that. We do think that as far as 9-10, we can close that year properly. As far as the 10-11 year, we really can't give you good estimates based on the different points that I've raised. I can say to you that Alan and I have looked at it from the perspective of the governor's budget. If the governor's budget and revenues were used along with the COLA as presented by the General Assembly, the budget would be about $94,000 to the good for the budget that's been submitted and is before this body tonight. So that would be the best case solution. If the General Assembly's 2010 numbers were increased by about $112,000 is what the governor's budget showed as increase in aid, and they used the General Assembly's COLA provisions, be short about $36,000. If you use the General Assembly's numbers with a 3% reduction and netting out what would be left of ERA funds if they use the $700,000, the exposure I see could be as much as $500,000 still. And this doesn't get us, at this point, even to the education aid formula and what that cost would be, which was forecast at the $468. But just the budget itself, without the education aid formula, we've still got a range of the $500,000. We had hoped that by the time we got the supplemental in place, we'd have a much tighter plus or minus number. But at this point, until the dust settles and we know what the amount of state aid is that's going into the budget, what the amount of ERA aid is that's going into the current budget, we don't know what the base is going to start out with for the 11 year. So that's the best information that I have for updates on where we stand after the House meetings last night. Again, Senate has not taken up the issue. They started today, and it's been delayed. So now, with that as an introduction, we can go to the handout. If everybody's got the handout that was on the table, I want to say that the first page shows how we would establish the municipal budget, the transfer to the schools. We're still working with the revaluation, and the revaluation is going to have plus or minus numbers associated with it, probably more minus numbers as far as reductions than increases. But we're still forecasting somewhere in the $14.10 range. But again, that $14.10 range also is going to mean that in addition to that, people are going to pick up about $112 per motor vehicle. So while it's a 1.5% increase in the tax levy, which some have suggested is not a lot of money, they will see on the motor vehicle tax, based on this calc, about $112.50 per vehicle if the car was valued over $6,000 last year. Again, if the General Assembly doesn't give us the right to increase or tax for that value, it means that the real estate rate would have to increase. But on this first page, what this shows is what the budget would be, the forecast at the $14.10, and again, that's a plus or minus figure until we get the reval hearings completed and some of the adjustments in place. And it's a $995,000 levy increase, or 1.5%. Again, the cap, if people are interested, was 4.5%. So we are at 3% below what that cap was. Moving on to the second page. The second page first shows a summary of the 8 funds that the town operates with. For budgetary purposes, the only 2 that are influenced by property taxes are the general fund and the school fund. The overall budget, net of the interfund transfers, and that's where the same money is counted twice, once in the school fund and once in the general fund. We've got an $89.6 million program that's part of the preliminary budget. It's $1.6 million below what the adopted budget was for the 9-10 year, or 1.76% below. The next set of numbers shows us the expenditure statement as far as the general fund is concerned. Again, what we're looking at is approximately a $667,000 reduction from what the adopted budget was for the 9-10 year, or about 1%. The next set of accounts looks at the revenue statement, and with the revenue statement that we're looking at, the major reason why we're seeing budget reductions is because of the reductions that are necessary with the loss of state aid or forecasted state aid. We're forecasting that state aid will be about $1.95 million less to the general fund in the 11 year than it was budgeted in the 10 year. So with that type of a loss, when you get rid of the school components of our budget, we got about a $20 million budget, so it's almost 3%. The next accounting statement is on the school fund, and this is based on the schools committee's submitted budget at $58.647 million, plus their revenue statement. The revenue statement is as included in the budget that was submitted by the school committee. Again, we are looking at if there's substantial changes in that $9,255,000 number, which is inclusive of the ARA funds and inclusive of the state aid education funds. Adjustments will be necessary to bring that expenditure into line with the revenue statement availability. The next page, and I'm not going to go through these in detail, are all of the smaller funds. The first 2 is Neighborhood Guild and PDOB. Peacedale Office Building, the town owns that building since 1983. We continue to have it in private sector rent, and a portion of it that's used for recreational programming. It costs us approximately $82,000 a year and we're generating about $93,000. Any surplus that is in there stays in fund balance and is used for building restoration. Neighborhood Guild, the various programs are listed there. Again, no property taxes for either of those 2 programs. Water fund, wastewater fund, and the solid waste enterprise funds. Enterprise funds do not have property tax dollars associated with them. All fees that are collected as user fees are used to pay for the expenses for each of those funds that are accounted for as proprietary enterprises. Senior Services Program is the last, and we maintain that program. Has got a transportation program, a senior center, a adult day services program, and a nutrition program. There is a small transfer of $350,000 that goes from the general fund to be able to keep this program afloat. Of the $715,000, we're also receiving approximately $140,000 from Narragansett and North Kingstown to offset our costs. This is a regional program which works to the benefit of really the three communities as it relates to the adult day services and to the two communities, Narragansett and South Kingstown, for the nutrition program and the senior center. The last page is really the financial resolutions that are necessary that address use of reserve funds. The town operates with a number of capital reserve funds in an effort to not have costs for special projects that aren't being bonded where there would be spikes. Let's say if we were going to do a new roof and it was going to cost $500,000. We would be able to go over a 3-year period for that $500,000 so that we wouldn't be having large increases one year in the capital budget and lower the next. Replacement of EMS trucks, they're worth $150,000. Rather than budgeting $150,000, we may budget $50,000 a year for 3 years. So there's those type of transfers, so the money is appropriated in the general fund and then gets transferred to each of those different reserves. Other transfers that are there is because we operate with enterprise funds, the enterprise funds administrative services costs are revenues coming back to the general fund because we pay for them using personnel that are in the general fund. So these are the different transfers that are necessary. Some of them also go for accounting purposes into compensated absences fund, which needs to be properly funded, or the healthcare reserve fund, because we pay all of our healthcare costs for town and school through that fund. So these are items that really are only necessary after the budget's adopted. But as part of the budget process, we want all of the information that we'll talk about the transfers from that general fund or school fund to be a part of and resident to the document that you have before you. That's a thumbnail of what is before you. I'll turn it back to you, Kathy, as far as any specific questions that folks have, or we'll be glad to try to answer.
Okay. Well, does anybody on the council who's well aware of all these numbers, I think, have any questions for Steve or anybody on the school committee before we start going out to the general public? Nope. Okay, Jim, sorry.
Just the 90 days, Steve, that's still up in the air. We're just moving forward with our adoption on May 3rd, or when will we know if that is going to change?
My recommendation to the council would be that the budget process should stay as the charter outlines it. The council does have the ability, just as the school committee has the ability, to adjust budgets as they go forward. My feeling is that we should look at the normal budget process, and if the programs cannot fit within the dollars that are available, we're going to need to deal with how do we deal with that. If we've got a loss of so many dollars, we have to look at, are there expenditure reductions that can be made? And this is, again, on both the town and the school side. And if we get to a point where the level of service would be inadequate for what needs to be done, then decisions have to be made. I'm not suggesting that we would use the availability of undesignated fund balance if those were a requirement, but those funds are available that would allow us to do those type of adjustments if necessary. Those have profound impact on later year budget developments, but again, based on charter provisions, the ability to be able to amend the budget is possible. I do want to say the one thing that we will have to wait on would be the motor vehicle tax documentation, because I can't send the tax bills out because I can't set the rate until I know what the size of the taxable roll would be for motor vehicles. So if the budget of the state doesn't get done until June 15th, we would have to hold certification of the tax roll at that point until we had an indication as to where that's going. But that is the only thing that would hold up certification in terms of the recommendation I would make to the town council.
And the fourth quarter for the motor vehicles, is that up in the air, or can we?
No, if the supplemental is approved, and there wasn't much question on that, we
Okay.
will be receiving about $1.82 million in the current year. which is just below the $2 million that we had. I mean, we had expected we were going to lose substantially more than that. We had forecast we were losing $1 million. But based on the changes that have occurred, almost all of what we had budgeted, because remember, we underestimated the revenue from that for concerns that the supplemental would come out. The real number should have been around 2.3. We used a $2 million number. They came in at $2,178,000 as being what we were entitled to if we got 100%. So of that $2,178,000, we end up with about $1,860,000. So for the current year, that's fine, but we need to have definition for 10, 11.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions on that excellent presentation and how confusing and the moving numbers that we're dealing with the state of Rhode Island, just makes it a little bit more confusing for everybody, but please come forward if you'd like to start. I'll start with the general fund, if anybody has any questions regarding the general fund. No? All right, then if not, we move on to the school fund. So if there's any questions regarding the school fund, please come forward and again, state your name clearly for the record. And again, this is a public hearing, so we're here to listen to the public.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle. Thank you. I don't know if I heard we can't talk about configurations.
No, we're here to talk about the preliminary budget as presented.
Okay, but don't some of the school configurations impact the budget?
Really, Jonathan, what we're here right now is to talk about the preliminary budget. At this point, I think that was at the school committee meetings last night that you talked about it.
Well, I mean, I have concerns about the school budget, and there's different configurations that are going to impact the amount of the budget, the amount of money needed to run their budget. So I don't know if the public hearing will address both the general fund and the school fund. I would think that since configurations do impact the budget, that would be part of. I would think that would be part of the discussion.
All right, Jonathan, why don't you tell us what you're thinking, and then, again, refer it back to the budget.
Okay, well, then, you're right. I hope that everybody would have the right to speak
go
to
right
that.
ahead.
Okay. Oh, I'm glad I don't need an attorney. Okay. I guess, I have concerns over the process that's happened. The conversation started in basically February, and everybody has known the budget, has been talked about meeting after meeting after meeting, how dire the budget times are, for the last couple of years, but especially last year. We broke up our 6, 7, 8 middle school model at both schools because of how tight budgets are. So I think everybody was aware of that, and I think all the forecasts at that time were that things were going to get worse and not get better. So I'm not really sure where, after the referendum, where we, in June, that we finally knew what the budget was going to be, that the discussion was not started soon thereafter. I don't know if it would be in the summer or September, October, but it wasn't started until February, and now there's kind of a decision being rushed. I guess I would like to hear, maybe more conversation between the boards. This is kind of how I have seen it, that at the last town council and school committee meetings, I feel like the town council kind of passed the buck to the school committee, saying to the school committee, well, this is your budget, why would you even think of asking for more money? And I have heard some discussion at the school committee table that they feel that they were meeting a demand set by the town council to cut the budget by $1.2 million. So I don't need to hear that right now, but I'm hoping that tonight we can kind of flesh out with everybody here in the same room, what is the town council's demand? Did they see this happening in February when it was cut 1.2? Now with state projections looking like we're going to get less, are they still sticking to that? And does the school committee really feel like they did an adequate job advocating for the community's children I think probably in good faith, I would hope, they met your demand, but now things have deteriorated even further. Yeah, I guess, hopefully the proposal of closing Curtis Corner, reopening South Road, configuring the schools in that way, getting away from the team teaching, going back to a junior high model, because I think that many community members support the neighborhood schools and would see the closing of another elementary school, really further abandoning something that has been a part of what South Kingstown has been so proud of all these years. So I don't know if that can be talked about more tonight, because I think that what that piece is, and one of the council members has, I think, pushed on this before. I think what that piece is, it would actually save the taxpayer more money, so it would be respectful to the taxpayer, which everybody's trying to do. It would actually protect more of the core program by saving more money, so that we wouldn't have to get into potentially having to cut music and sports. Nobody wants to do that. So I think that if we can come up with additional savings, being respectful to the taxpayer, and also protecting more of the core program, I would hope that the town council would be interested in that. I guess the last thing, Dr. Hicks was referred to. I don't know if this is in public or if I heard it privately, but I definitely heard it from a school committee member. It wasn't like a conversation about a conversation. Was referred to as the Tom Brady of superintendents. And, we're going to have to replace Tom Brady. Okay, so everybody knows, right? Now, last budget year in February, there was a work session that Dr. Hicks identified closing one of the outlying elementary schools. He thought it made more sense from a population growth standpoint, and he also identified that there was going to be additional savings if an outlying school was closed. And no disrespect to the current superintendent, she's new. Again, in good faith, I'll say she's doing the best that she can. But I guess where I'm not clear is why I haven't heard more conversation from the school committee members about some of what that conversation was. There really hasn't been any dialogue that way. And I guess what I would say, this is where my real concern comes from, is if Tom Brady came to me and told me, hey, listen, this is how you're going to throw a football. This is how you win championships. I'd want to listen, and I'd want to keep that embedded in my mind and make sure that we keep that part of the conversation. So I think that Tom Brady, so to speak, gave the school committee a lot of good information, and it feels like outside looking in, it's being ignored. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come forward and state your name. Again, we're still on the school fund topic.
My name is Dr. Wardwell. I'm a retired professor. This is only my second time in front of the school committee and the town council. I'm a little bit surprised, just an observation, that at a public meeting you don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I come from Narragansett, where at every council meeting, and every school committee meeting, the Pledge of Allegiance is said. Has nothing to do with the budget, but just make the observation. I don't know why that isn't done here.
We'll take it under advisement.
I think it
Dr.
should
Wardwell.
be, so I'll put that down for the record.
Okay.
I want to congratulate Mr. Alford, Dr. Mega, school committee members, the council, for doing diligent work in reducing the budget, as you had to do. I know that a larger portion of every town's taxes are allocated to schools. And I know what it is in Narragansett because I attended their meetings for 16 years. I don't promise to bug you for another 16. but I know that it usually has been up to 80 to 85% of spending in the town goes to the school. The proposed expenditures total $58,647,873, which is, if it was printed correctly and my accounting is correct, $964,090 less than 2009. So I congratulate you for that. However, as I reported to the one time that I went to the school committee meeting, that does not touch items of salaries and benefits that are already extant in the school committee's budget of a union negotiated increase for top step teachers of 3.5%, which is 7% in 2 years. I think if we were to look at that, and the school committee, I'm sure, will be looking at that as they negotiate with the union next time, and with the economic situation the state is in, which is a dire situation, we should not be granting any increases. We should make Steve Alford's job easier, Dr. Stringfellow's job easier, and our job easier, and would decrease the taxes, which are going to be 1.54 increase in levies. I don't know what the top step salary for teachers is here, but I imagine it's an $83,000 range. Probably right on, Dr. Mega. If we add the $20,000 benefit package, which is normal, we're looking at a $100,000 package for top step teachers, which is more, I think, than most people in town are making. I don't know what the current general instruction level is here, but in Narragansett, it's over $17,000. I would imagine it's over that in South Kingstown. Sometimes we have a decrease in student population, but we have an increase in salaries. So we're looking at, from Dr. Stringfellow's standpoint and from our standpoint, 75% of school costs are going to salaries and benefits. So I'd just like to have the school committee look at that next time. So we're high, and yet you've all done a good job of reducing the budget. So I congratulate you on that. We're still having to increase the levy. And I know a lady who has to decide between costing out for her medicines or eating. I kid you not. I know another lady whose home is going to be foreclosed on. She has 3 children. You all know a number of people out of work. So I guess what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, I commend you for your work, but at the same time, I caution all of us, me too, to try to continue to be vigilant, especially the school committee, to try to keep the cost down. I thank you for the time.
I appreciate you coming up, and it is my mistake about the Pledge of Allegiance. I really should have done that, so my faux pas, I take total blame for that. I apologize.
It's all right. Just another observation. I am getting older in years,
So am I.
and so are all of us. However, I am also a video producer. If the amplifier is turned on, it must be at crack 3, not at crack 7. Because when Steve was talking, and you were talking, I could not hear hardly a word. So, just a suggestion, Mr. Alford. Somebody might want to check the electro voice amplifier and see if we can take it up a notch Either that, or next time I'll bring my hearing aid. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Tony?
I don't want to diminish Dr. Wardwell's eloquent comments by just stating that it's 3.05% and 6.1%. Not that I'm saying that makes a substantial difference to the context of the commentary, but just for the sake of accuracy.
Thank you. Again, we're still on the school fund. Please come forward, state your name, speak clearly into the microphone.
Hi, Bob Traeger. I just want to expand a little bit on what Dr. Wardwell said. If I could ask a question of the school committee. Last year, one of the things they did, and I really don't know how much money it saved, but all non-union employees took a pay freeze. Is that correct? Is that still true for this year? Just asking. So
No,
they're going
it's not true for this year.
2 years without a pay raise?
No, that's not true. That's not true for this year.
All right,
It
so they're
can
getting
become-
their regular pay raise, or are they getting back pay too?
They're not getting back pay in the context of the full amount. It would be given over a period of a number of years. I don't recall exactly if there were 3 or 4. 3 years. Thank you, Chuck.
But in essence, they will get it all back.
Well,
Eventually.
it's tied to a ratio with the NEASK contract.
Okay,
So,
you don't-
so
you-
that ratio, those numbers can
That's
change.
okay, you
based
don't
on
have to
that. Yeah.
explain that. Actually, I was going to defend them not getting a pay cut because I personally know 2 principals, not even in this district, but I know some of the principals that my kids have, and the amount of hours that a principal puts in a school is astronomical, far more than most teachers. And a friend of mine who was a principal over at West Warwick High School, he gave it up because it was, it really, quite frankly, wasn't worth the pay. I mean, it was, $25,000 more. He worked ungodly hours and had to put up with a lot of grief. So I'm glad to hear, actually, that they're getting a pay raise. But that was just one question I had. I don't object to the budget at all, really. However, there's been a lot of talk about, and I won't get into specifics about school closures and all that, but I'm in favor of consolidation wherever it can be made, if it doesn't harm or cause foul to any particular community. But if we can make better use of our buildings, I'm all for that. There's been lots of talk whether it be Curtis Corner should be closed. Maybe that could be the rec center the town's looking for. I've heard lots of ideas, but that's open for debate. I don't really have a stand either way on any of those. But if we do find that we have a shortfall of 500, 100,000, or whatever the number may be, I do believe that the school budget has plenty of room. I don't think it's as dire as people have made it out to be. I do believe there's plenty of room to cut. And whether or not the people at this table find it easy or not remains up in the air, but I personally wouldn't have any problem looking at some things. And I'm going to point out just a couple things that I've learned about recently that, and I can't put a dollar value on it, but just examples of what I consider waste. My daughter came home from high school the other day and told me that she's taking French, and they have 4 years of French, and I guess French, Italian, and Spanish are the 3 languages. I don't know if there's anything else. And she wanted to take Mandarin or Chinese, but obviously that got cut due to lack of interest, I believe. But she told me that there's going to be a French 1.5 for kids that pass French 1 but aren't quite ready for French 2. To me, I don't know. Either you pass or you fail. I mean, French 1.5, I don't know if that's an attempt to keep an extra French teacher on or what the deal with that is, but French 1.5 sounds like waste to me. When my daughter enrolled in high school, they sent a little curriculum guide, and one of the courses was sports marketing, I believe the name of it was. And the description read, if you own a sports team, I'm thinking, well, if you own a sports team, you're going to do, you better do a lot better in school than take sports marketing. You better do really well in business and other things, but I don't see the reason for having a sports marketing course. And another, in the music department, they have guitar lessons. And I'm not positive, but it sounded like it was one-on-one lessons. Now, I pay for piano lessons for my kid, and they're not cheap. But to give individualized lessons to kids in school for music, I don't think that's the role of the public school. Band, elementary music, all that kind of stuff, I'm all for that. Individualized lesson plans for music, that seems like a luxury to me. So those are just 3 things that I'm aware of just from going through the curriculum guide without ever going through the school and seeing what goes on there. So, you know, I don't think we're in dire straits. I think we have a good school. I think this is a budgetary problem that's hard on everyone, but I do think with hard work, things can be done to keep the quality programs we have without hurting the general school population. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Traeger. John, please use the microphone, John. I don't.
Just as a point of clarification, relative to the course offerings, I know it is the superintendent's plan following student enrollment in the courses to review the number of children in each section, and if it doesn't warrant keeping a section, that will be reduced. So we shouldn't see any low enrollments in any of these sections, whether it's foreign language or any of the other offerings.
Okay, thank you, John, for clarifying. Okay, please state your name for the record.
Yes, good evening. Laura LeClaire, 80 Seaview Avenue. I was at the meeting last night, and I had a number of questions which were answered, and unfortunately I wasn't able to stay throughout the whole meeting, but I understand that there was a conversation between Mrs. Whaley and Mr. Mueller about the handshake agreement. Now, I understand the position that the school committee is in with the fiscal shortcomings that we have to face. And I understand that putting the 5th graders over to Broad Rock was at first considered an educational factor, that's what we wanted to do with the 5th graders because that would be beneficial for the 5th graders. But now we're in a situation with this fiscal shortcoming that we're forced to close the school, and that is the recommendation of the superintendent, and we all know that this is going to be addressed. So if this is the situation, why is it that the school committee cannot say to the town council, oh, you told us to cut $1 million too, but we're coming up short, almost $1 million, and we really need that in order to prevent a school to be closed, whether it's Matunic or West Kingston or Wakefield. And obviously everybody in Wakefield thinks it's Wakefield because that's the school that's been thrown out there as the one closing. Whereas I would argue that, I don't want any school to close, but last year Dr. Hicks's opinion was that Matunic was the one that should be closed, if that was to come. I understand, though, that the conversation between Mrs. Whaley and Mr. Miller had to do with the handshake agreement, that if this funding or if this money was given to the school committee, that it would be utilized in order to prevent the closing of the school and to cover those financial shortcomings should they come about at the state level. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but maybe you can enlighten me as to where that has come in the last 24 hours, not even 24 hours, last 18 hours since that discussion ensued at the meeting.
I just want to clarify, Laurel, that I attended the school committee meeting last night strictly as a taxpayer, a parent in town. Mr. Mueller did try to engage me to put my town council hat on, and I did state that I did not have that hat on at the table. There was a dialogue with the handshake agreement that we do have between the town council and the school committee, and that may be a future conversation. So in order to better understand, I don't know if Mr. Alford really would like to explain in more detail for the audience the agreement between the town council and the school committee with the handshake agreement. And I think Scott probably would like to speak too. But did I clarify that, Scott?
There's nothing magical about the handshake agreement that's been used in the past. It's real simple. It's a case where the school committee adopts a budget on a yearly basis. If they receive more dollars than what they anticipated, they agree not to expand the size of that program as a means of, because they've got additional dollars in that hadn't been anticipated. And that money then goes into fund balance and is reappropriated the following year to offset property taxes. In the current year, the amount that's been budgeted is $470,000, Al? $484,000. And if, in fact, the school committee doesn't need it, as I said, I expect that they could turn a $400,000 surplus. I want to also say if a $400,000 surplus on a $58 million budget is less than 1%, so it's not like they're rich. But the handshake agreement would simply say that they're not going to amend and expand programs because they've got the dollars available, but rather they would stick with the program that they adopted. I don't know if that explains it.
Well, I guess my point is that is there going to be some sort of discussions between the school committee and the town council as to maybe we can rectify the situation with the school committee being in such a pickle and have this handshake agreement? So I guess that's my question to the town council and the school committee. Are you going to get together and maybe try to work this out so that we don't have to close a community school?
I think a lot of the question is going to come down to if that's necessary, when's the appropriate time? Is the appropriate time once you have what the state dollars are and you've got an evaluation of the program or the education decisions that the collective school committee wants to make, and what that difference is in terms of what they feel is the break point for what they need. It's easy to say, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if the town put $500,000 into its contingency account and said, if you need it, we'll give it to you. But that doesn't address whether or not there's other items that should be exercised in advance of that type of money being made available within the school program. Whether it's decisions as far as the 5th grade, whether it's decisions about full-day K, whether it's decisions about closing schools, whether it's decisions associated with teacher contracts and modifications that could occur to those. All of those things are items that I think, in my opinion, would need to be dealt with in advance of trying to bring closure to, we've got to a point where we know what our revenues are, we know what the program is, we have no other place to turn, but this is what we need. And I think it sounds like a simple solution to just simply say, let's put the money in escrow and they can use it if they want it. But we have to look at the fact that any tax increases that go through at this point are hurting people. Our tax collection rates are not as good as they were. We're seeing people that are unemployed, that own homes, that are having trouble holding on to those homes. So there is a concern. I do want to correct one statement that you made. The town council never, nor did I, ever require the school department to cut $1.2 million. This has been bantered about several times. I've corrected it several times. But no one has required them to cut the $1.2 million. What we said to the school department, and it was me who said it originally, is that if we're going to lose the state aid for the motor vehicles, if you look at the front page of the budget document that you got in front of you tonight, you see that the share of the school taxes is $47.5 million of the $61 million that we're going to collect. If we're going to lose in tax collections those $2 million in motor vehicles, in some communities, what the communities have said to the school departments is to cut their budgets by an amount equal to how much of that tax share is going to the schools. We haven't suggested that to the school department. What we did suggest is that when you put your revenue statement together, that you use the same amount that you had in the prior year, the $47,707,000. If, in fact, it worked out to $1.2 million that they reduced, that's what it took to reduce the budget to get it into balance. I think it's erroneous for somebody to suggest that a budget's been cut from the time it went from the superintendent's budget to becoming the school committee's budget. I'm not sure that there's any year in the past that the superintendent's budget that's prepared in January actually was adopted at 100% by the school committee when they put their budget together. Anybody who is or has been a part of the budget practice should be able to attest to that. So I got concerns when there's been a suggestion made that somebody's told the school committee to cut that budget, because that's just not the case.
Okay, back to my original question. You said that there's a timeline in order to have discussions about a handshake agreement, and you don't know because you don't know what the state's going to do. But the school committee does know that they have to make a decision by June 1st. They have to do it to know who's getting hired back out of the 99 pink slips, where the teachers are going, where the kids are going, moving everything, if that's the possibility. So they're very pessimistic, as was the tenor, not that anybody said that, the tenor of last night's meeting, that these decisions weren't going to be made. We are not going to know what the state funding formula is. We are not going to have the bottom line on the COLA. We are not going to know what the cut in state aid is. So they're going to be forced to make a decision based on the worst case scenario. If that's the situation, shouldn't we be a little concerned that maybe we should be engaging in some sort of agreement, whereas if you supply, or obviously it comes from taxes, but if you are giving the school a certain amount of money to cover this, that you're protecting the closure of an elementary school where you may look in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and think, gosh, we should not have closed that school down. Just like now, 10 years from now, the population is so down, people are thinking, God, we should not have built that Broad Rock Middle School. That is my point. I'm not saying that you required the committee to reduce by 1.2 million. I understand the issues that are out there when it comes to budget. I'm talking now about this. Is there any way we're going to save a school? I guess that's my only point.
Thank you very much. If anybody else would like to come forward and talk about the school fund? Oh, Mr. Angeli?
I just want to be very clear about something. The superintendent in no way, shape, or form at this point in time has made a firm recommendation about closing the school. She has listed it as an option of 3 options that are available to the school committee to get their budget into balance, but she has not advocated, recommended, or suggested at this point that we'll be closing a school. So I just wanted to be clear with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Patrice Newman, a Wakefield resident. I have a couple of comments, and then I have actually, maybe first I should ask this question about this forum. Is it appropriate for those on that side of the table to speak to what's asked from the podium?
Well, really,
Or only when specific members are asked?
Well, really, what this is a public hearing, so we're really here to listen to the public's concerns and comments, really. We've had work sessions in the past. I mean, if somebody feels that they want to comment, you know, that has,
Okay.
as you've seen, has already happened, but we are here to listen to you.
Okay, I guess one of my issues with that is that I think one of the issues here is that these questions surrounding the potential closure of Wakefield School and the moving of the fifth graders to Broad Rock and all kinds of very fundamental changes in the educational system are are very passionate for a lot of people, obviously. And I think it's also incumbent on public officials to embrace that passion and I'm sure you all do privately and however much it shows in a public meeting, to really delve into that debate to the depth that it merits. Because, for one thing, I think there are two core issues here. There are the budget numbers, and then there are the core elements of the town's identity that are represented in this debate. Wakefield, as a town community, is unique in South Kingstown, and it is also a very unusual reality in the United States as a whole, and something that should be preserved and protected. In Wakefield, the school contributes to the mixture that is a spontaneous mixed-use development. It's not even created as a development. It's just a nice reality that is left over from other generations, and it would be a shame to see it degraded by shutting down such a fundamental piece of it as the school, is my feeling. And I know it's your responsibility to wrestle with very, very difficult numbers and a lot of different line items, and be looking at so many different levels of a spreadsheet, and it seems impossible to consider certain realities sometimes when you're engaged in something so incremental. But I do think that as you consider the spreadsheet numbers, you need, and it sounds presumptuous for me to say you need to do this and you need to do that, but I'm on this side of the podium, so it's the only time I have to offer this perspective. But these are extreme, these issues affect generations. It's not just a 12-month issue. And it's unfair to take a very limited view of it in time, in my opinion. And I would welcome an understanding of the various members' feelings on these issues. And I have this is only the second meeting I've been able to attend, so I'm sure I've missed many voicings of those opinions. But if anyone could share some things right now, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice, and thank you for your letter.
I would point out that there are going to be future opportunities at school committee meetings. We have, I think, have had very open dialogue and have gone well beyond what is considered our typical public forum time to allow for that. It would not be appropriate for me to now run a school committee meeting this evening, but there will be opportunities with a school committee meeting in approximately 2 weeks, in which the superintendent did spell out that she would review options that have going to have pertinence to this discussion. So opportunity will exist.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to come forward on the school budget? School funds, that's what we're on. Again, state your name for the record.
Keith Warhaven, I'm your neighbor here on High Street. I'd like to thank Scott Mueller for last night. You clarified the Broad Rock issue for me. I never had anyone concisely give me the timeline and the information that went into that decision. So kudos to you, well done, and I hope you get a raise.
He won't be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a catharsis thanks to your comments. I really came away from that meeting with an appreciation for the decisions you're going to be asked to make. You'll be answering for years into the future. And somehow that didn't really register with me. Again, sometimes you get so compressed in the moment that you stop to go 3-4 years down the line. You may be asked to explain that decision yet again. So thank you for that. A realization that I also had was, I don't recall who said it, perhaps it was you or somebody else, in the context of Broad Rock and why we did it and what happened and where the error went. My understanding was the error was we didn't know that the planning board was going to cut all the building permits, and there goes our projections. Our projections were on current forecasts, and that changed. Is that an accurate statement? Not to point fingers at the planning board, just that.
That wouldn't be my assessment. We certainly were aware of the deliberations of the planning board and the possibility of placing a cap on building permits. We operated on the best projections for emphasizing the shorter run periods enrollment where we had the greatest accuracy, and an assessment that the junior high school was bursting at the seams in the moment with no real projection for decline in enrollment. And it really was not until we took charge of Broad Rock that we started to see differences in projection. It was broadly discussed within the community. Frankly, people who today think that that was an error on the advantage of 10 years hindsight clarifies both vision and judgment remarkably. But at the time, I think that we made, all of us, made our best assessment of where enrollment was going, focusing on the data that our enrollment projector said was the most accurate data, and without a trend line that suggested a decline in enrollment. And it was hard to project what the impact would be of placing the cap on building permits. We knew that it would have some impact, but we didn't have a history in this town that would give us a reasonable judgment about what the impact was going to be on the enrollment projections that we had, either from Mr. Toomey or from NASDAQ at that time.
I would want to point one other thing out in the context of where we are with Curtis Corner Middle School, which is considered right now a crowded school. So it took that many years for us to be able to fit those children into Curtis Corner Middle School. And so that is 2009, 2010. So if it took that 8 or 9 years to get to the point where we had a school that could accommodate grades 7 and 8. And so there were many years where that wouldn't have been able to be accommodated.
I didn't really follow that, but I appreciate that. I'll take your word for it. I'll leave the podium with this thought. As you're making your decisions on where you're going to have to meet these financial goals, if you could focus on a solution that distributes the burden on everyone, I think that would be a far more palatable solution to the people at large. And I'm not advocating for raising taxes. I strongly have faith in your ability to rectify this situation without having to raise taxes. However, next year, perhaps we'll pursue that further. And to put a finer point on it, if you were to close Curtis Corner and move the 7th and 8th to Broad Rock and bring the 6th graders back to the elementary school, I think that would be a burden that would be more equitably shared amongst the students and parents. And I, for one, am not jumping at a chance to have my daughter spend hours a week on a bus. That was a lifestyle choice that I made, and I have no interest in enforcing, passing judgment on somebody else's opinion But if Wakefield was closed, you can do the math. For each student, they'd probably spend an hour on a bus conceivably with the redistricting. But I feel like I'm jumping ahead because I know that in 2 weeks, Dr. Stringfellow is going to present us with this information. But that would be a sizable burden to place on the students of Wakefield that would not be equitably distributed amongst the rest of the students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy?
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve.
I-
Go ahead.
I want to address this issue as far as the planning board is concerned, because I'm not sure what was said last night, but anybody who would like to review in the capital budget document under the pacing and phasing and education impact fees, I've written a section that talks about the Broad Rock Road construction, and just to make sure that we put things in proper context. The school, what I had written here in one paragraph was that the South Kingstown school system experienced unprecedented growth in student population in the mid-'80s through 2000. During that term, student enrollment grew from 2,942 students in 1986 to 4,383 in 1999. This 48.9% growth in student enrollment require the construction of multiple school building additions that have had profound impact on the operational costs associated with our schools. The discussion to construct a new school building, the first since the mid-1970s when the Matunic and West Kingston Elementaries went online, began in 1997. At that time, Curtis Corner Junior High housed over 700 students with an optimal capacity of about 675. Further school enrollments were forecast that the community was also debating at that time the need for a middle school and getting away from the junior high model. The school committee, with voter approval for the $10 million, and this was approved in November of 1998. And again, November of 1998 was the height of the enrollment expansions that we were seeing, directed the construction of a new school facility that would facilitate the implementation of a middle school program. The development of the middle school program to be housed at both Curtis Corner and Broad Rock facility allowed for redistributions of the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The implementation of the middle school program also alleviated overcrowding in the elementary schools by removing the 6th grade population. Construction of Broad Rock began in the fall of 1999 and opened in September of 2001. September of 2001 was the first year that we began to see enrollment declines. But Broad Rock was a product of the need for change in middle school program. It was also a byproduct was to provide additional space at the elementary levels. Remember, we had, during the 1980s, I think we constructed about 7, 8, 9 different additions to each of our schools. When we did the construction for the additions on, we built Matunic and West Kingston in 1975. We put the additions on, I think, in 1983. We were running out of space in terms of the capacity. With the concept of a middle school program, which was something that the community dedicated itself to, it couldn't continue to be had just simply at Curtis Corner. So I've heard many times, it's been 10 years out where we made a big mistake. Understand what the reasonings were in 1997, 1998, and what the population changes were. The town instituted a pacing and phasing ordinance, which limited the number of building permits in the town. It was an ordinance that was a background ordinance. When you say a background ordinance, you mean it only goes into effect if you hit a threshold. We hit the threshold once for a 3-month period. The ordinance never restricted the number of building permits other than, I believe, for a 3-month period. So the planning board's comprehensive planning program was not what provided for a mistake in terms of building a middle school. The demographics of our community from the year 2000 have also changed. The value of real estate and the inability for working families or young families to be able to afford to live in our community has had a profound impact on the amount of enrollment that occurs. There's a lot of other decisions that went in. So I just want to make sure that it's not a case where one hand's not knowing what the other hand's doing, because I think that there was a collaborative effort. If it hadn't been a collaborative effort, it was the school committee working with the council at that time to be able to get the bond issue passed in 1998, and it started in 1997. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There were different issues than we're dealing with now, but the decision was a valid decision based on the circumstances and where they were, the issues that they were dealing with at that time. I'm not sure what was said last night, but that's my take on it.
Scott?
As the person who tried off the top of my head to generate that, without all of the factual stuff that you included, I think that what I tried to communicate was that it's my judgment, it was a collective effort, and it's my judgment that it was not an error. It was thoroughly vetted in the community and widely supported in the community, and it was absolutely needed. We were bursting at the seams at the junior high. We were looking at a different educational model. I know that there are people at the time who argued, even though the middle school model was widely accepted as a significant improvement in the educational process, there were people who argued we ought to stick with kind of a 1950s, 1960s junior high model. Ultimately, that was not the decision of the community. It was not the decision of the school committee. It was not the decision of the town council. And so we went out into the community. So I appreciate the additional factual information. I think I was close on some of the facts, but not.
Well, I'm sure that you read the entire capital budget, so some of it just came back to you.
I have. It didn't, for some reason, pop into my memory. It was.
Now I'm hurt.
Good evening.
Could you
My
state-
name's Gerard McEntee.
Thank you.
I'm a little new at this, and just, I guess, some observations. I have just got my assessment on my home, and my assessment's gone down $100,000 from the last time I got assessed. I'm looking at this paper here, and I see that the tax rate is going up, projected tax rate is going up to $14.10 per thousand, if I'm not mistaken about this. If I'm not doing this correctly, please, I'm kind of new at this, and I've never been to one of these meetings before. I'm looking at the school budget, and I heard earlier that if I'm mistaken, please correct me, that last year the teachers got a 3.5 increase in salary, and they're
0.05.
3 point.
About 2.5 average for everyone.
Okay, and they'll be getting that again this year also?
Yes, third year of the contract.
Third year of the contract. One of the other questions I had, do the teachers make a contribution to their health insurance?
Yes, they do.
What is that basically?
Average of 2 to 6%.
Average 2%. I've noticed in the last couple of days looking at CNN and what have you, for example, today in Cobb County at Georgia, the head of the superintendent of schools has asked their teachers to freeze their salaries for the next 2 years, to increase their co-payments to 15 to 20%. I've seen something today in New Jersey with the new governor, a Republican, has asked the teachers to take a freeze on their salaries and increase their co-payments on their insurance. And what I've seen or heard is that basically the teachers, even though we're talking about the kids in this South Kingston, that the teachers, maybe, or my perception is incorrect, that the teachers are not willing to forego a raise and are not willing to increase their co-payments on their insurance. If that's incorrect, I would appreciate letting known about that. I think if the teachers are so concerned about the students and they want to do the best they can for their students and help the community, it would behoove them, in my humble opinion, that they would do everything they could to make it easier on the community as a whole to to avoid having their taxes go up. I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income. I get Social Security. It was frozen last year. It's frozen this year. And I guess the perception, I'm being told, it may be frozen next year. Now, if we're going to continue to increase the teacher salaries and a co-payment of 2 to 6%, which I think is meaningless, and the teachers are not willing to give a little bit or hold back on their increases in salary, I think they're doing a disservice to the students, and I think they're doing a disservice to the community as a whole. So that's what I had to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Let me make sure that everybody has spoken before there's a second. Okay. And please state your name for the record.
Good evening. I'm Michael Minelli. I just want to take this opportunity to urge the school committee one more time to try to, within the scope of your level-funded budget, decreasing enrollment, which obtains a higher cost per pupil, just educate these kids. This budget is not saying close a school, cut music. It's saying to the system, make do with the same money you had last year for a lesser number of students. It requires analysis of what's before you. I don't know how much of that you do. Analysis versus discussion, reaching conclusions, recommendations. Years ago, I mean, when John Kennedy became president, one of the first things he was interested in is how much might does he have at his disposal, what with Khrushchev over on the other side. And he picked his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. And one of the things he wanted to know is, why does it cost so damn much to make a battleship, an aircraft carrier, an airplane? And Robert McNamara got known for hiring a bunch of young men and women called whiz kids. That's what they were labeled. And they developed quantitative analyses, which got into linear programming, critical path, dependencies. In fact, it became so popular, the Nautilus was built using those methods right down here in Groton, and it's the first weapon that ever came in under budget and ahead of schedule. Now, I don't know if we want to apply that to a weapon, but nonetheless, that's what happened there. And we use those same principles in New York City with welfare, food stamps, the homeless, even CompStat, crime in the systems within the police department. And we can apply very rigorous quantitative analysis to human programs. Rather than just the end result, an educated kid, you get into how does that kid approach and go through an educating process. I mean, that has to be accomplished. I see signs around town, support our schools. Quite frankly, I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know what kind of action it's exhorting taxpayers to engage in. Support the other $1 million, increase level funding, I don't know. But I do believe with the absolute value of the school budget, I think it's $58 million and change, plus declining enrollment, I mean, that's a statement in support of our children. It really is. And there was also talk about a breathing period so that you can find out what you really want to do for next year. Well, that's nonsense, too. I think it came from the audience, not you guys. But, you know, again, there's no such thing as a breathing period. You've got to do the job you were elected for. You knew you were not going to a clam bake. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting there. So, you know, you've got to knock your heads together and produce an educated child for the money you've got. I mean, that doesn't mean close a school, or that doesn't mean cut saxophone, or whatever the heck. I don't know. But just do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manelli.
Hello. My name is Teresa Tansey, and I'm a Wakefield resident and the mother of a 4-year-old daughter. She's not in school yet, but our plan when we moved here was to have her attend Wakefield Elementary School. but I am here to talk about the budget tonight. Clearly, we can all acknowledge the financial difficulties facing South Kingstown. And clearly, we can acknowledge limited options available at the local level to effectively deal with these difficulties. I say limited because there are only two options South Kingstown has for dealing with these. Those two options are raising the property taxes and cutting programs, services, or jobs. So to be clear, every time the state fails to meet its budget, it kicks the problem down to cities and towns, the place with the fewest options. The lack of leadership by the governor and the General Assembly in addressing these issues at a place where they have many more options for managing the deficits and raising the revenue have forced the difficult decisions on all of us, the school committee, the town council, and we, the community members. The General Assembly has repeatedly voted to cut aid to education, to cut the motor vehicle excise tax, and to cut aid to cities and towns, while simultaneously ignoring opportunities for fair tax policy to preserve the fabric of our community. I'll name just a few of those lost opportunities. Firstly, we have the richest 6,000 taxpayers getting tax breaks, more than half of whom live out of state, through a giveaway called the flat tax. Since its enactment in the year 2007, the state has lost $85 million. The second one I'd like to outline, 23 states have enacted a tax policy called combined reporting, which ends the shell game that multi-state corporations use to hide their income. Adopting this piece of legislation would end the shell game that multi-state corporations use to hide their income. This would also level the playing field for smaller companies and help Rhode Island's small business owners recover more quickly. The third opportunity that's been missed is the release of the tax expenditure report. And I feel that this is perhaps the most egregious because Rhode Island's failure to comply with this law ensures that we cannot accurately evaluate the effectiveness of the more than 200 tax expenditures the state allows individuals and corporations to claim, meaning that we have well over $1 billion going out of the state coffers without any accountability. So if it's true that everything is on the table, then let's be honest about how the General Assembly is shifting the burden onto the cities and towns, onto the town councils, and onto the school committees, and avoiding the politically difficult decisions themselves. Thank you.
Susan Kimmerline. Believe me, I don't relish getting up in front of people and using microphones. I teach 16-year-olds, and I'm fine with them, but I just feel like speaking to some of the issues regarding comments directed at the teacher contract. I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, I'm a taxpayer. I have a father-in-law who's permanently in a nursing home trying to sell his home. I have elderly neighbors on my street. So I feel like I'm pretty well balanced, and I'm not part of the negotiating team. I have faith in them that if the opportunity comes for a three-prong solution, they're going to be there. I have faith in the school committee to find the ways that they can to save here and there. I just hope that if that three-pronged solution comes to bear, that the town council will be there to support it.
Anybody else before Mr. Traeger gets up to speak? Okay, Bob, I guess you're up.
Bob Traeger again. Because Steve mentioned it, he talked about declining enrollments and the reason for it. And one of the reasons I think you gave was it's expensive to live in South Kingstown, and young families might not be able to afford that. At a recent school committee meeting, when the NESDEC people gave their report, a real estate agent got up and he said, well, I've seen signs of people buying houses, and they said, overall, New England is experiencing a trend downward in youth. And someone asked why? Because there's no jobs. Why are there no jobs? because of taxes. So when someone, and to try to tax rich people, fine, where are they? They don't live here. They're getting out of here. There's a few rich people here, but they're moving. I mean, if we don't put an end to the way we spend on unions, that is what's killing this state. That's what's killing our town. That's what's killing every town in this state. And I mean, anyone who says otherwise is really living in a fantasy land, because we don't have an unfunded pension liability in South Kingston, right? We're pretty good. Is that correct? But we're one of the only communities in the whole state that are that way. I mean, can you name another one? There's probably maybe a couple more.
There are a few that are in the Rhode Island municipal employees retirement system that is managed by the state, and you're required to fund your annual required contribution. So on the private plans are the ones that are in trouble in the state.
But a lot of the municipal ones and state-run ones are also, I mean, the cities are all behind in
It
there.
depends really when they joined. If
Right.
they've been a member for a long time, then their unfunded liability usually is down low and their funded ratio is up.
But I mean, I looked at some simple numbers. I mean, a teacher's contribution to his retirement is 9.5%. And the state and town kick in 20.5%. What's the town's contribution on that?
It's around 13%, I think, just under that.
All right, so
Yeah,
overall,
school
an
employees.
employee puts in 9.5%, and the government, the taxpayer, puts in 20.5%. Well, I never worked any job where anybody put in 20.5% to a retirement plan that I ever had. I had a plan where I put in 10% of my pay, and they matched 50% of the first couple $1,000s, and then maybe 2%. And then there might have been another plan where they gave you 2% or 3% of your salary. And I mean, unless you were a CEO and got some big deal, but the average worker doesn't get that kind of contribution to their plan. So if people can't see that that's really where the money's going, and that's where our problems lie, I mean, you know, we'll get through this year on the budget, but things are going to get, consistently worse. And until people speak out against it, I mean, I know we're a blue state, and it's a blue room, and but you know, facts are facts, and dollars are dollars, and people are moving out. I don't expect my kids are going to stay here when they grow up. I don't know what jobs they would get. I mean, they're not going to work in a hotel changing linens. So they're all smart. They're going to get an education, and they're going to have to go elsewhere. So,
Bob, I want to make sure that we're dealing with facts. Employer contributions for the state retirement system for police this year is 12.6%. The police are paying 9% out of their own pocket as well. But right now, the town's paying 12.6. EMS employees, the town's paying 3.2%. Municipal employees, general municipal employees, non-teachers, 6.2%. The employees are paying 7%. Over the last, I think, 15 years, the employee contributions have been significantly higher than what the employer contributions have been. And on those retirement systems, other than the teachers, we've got about a 99% funded ratio. So, I mean, as far as South Kingstown's concerned, we've done it right.
okay, you've done it right on your department, but the school committee gave a pretty
But no,
generous contract out last
Let's
time.
deal with the schools. The schools, the teachers are paying 8%, and the combined rate between the state and the town is at 21.4%.
Yeah, just so there's no confusion, the teachers are 9.5%.
I saw that in the Pro Joke
Okay,
today. It said 9.5.
And to go back to the employer contribution, the school on the teachers is 11.89% in the current year.
And the state picks up the rest, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think there is 60%
Federally funded
of
20%
that.
in Department of Education, 8.18. And for our non-teaching staff, employees' contribution is 7% and employer is 6.2.
But again, I want to make it clear that, you know, there's an awful lot of sins that have been committed when it comes to public pensions at municipal levels. Most of those are directly associated with private pension plans. In fact, I'll be honest, going back to the to the mid-1970s, one of the things that police contracts were looking for at that time was to get out of the state municipal system and go into the, at that time, the state wasn't offering a 20-year retirement plan, so they were looking to go into private plans. Some of the communities went to those, and most of them are back into the MERS plan at this point because there was considerable losses that were incurred. But the private plans also allowed people to pay less than what they should be paying. And those are the mistakes, but those are the things that are being waived at now, where the communities that have made the contributions that they should make on those plans, they are almost 100% funded. So what's happened at the state level in terms of the administration of the teacher plan is a different story. There was underfunding that occurred with that over the years, and that's the reason why there's a higher contribution required now, because...
On a state level.
Well, but again,
Not on a
it's
town
not-
level. As our contribution as far as the town goes, we're
Well, we're paying 60% of what the actuarial rate is, and the actuarial rate is based on some underfunding that occurred in previous years. So you're paying more now because you didn't pay enough several years ago. So, you know, I want to just make sure that we're dealing with facts, because it's real easy to read the newspaper and get real upset when you say, well, gee, some of these private pension plans are at 60% or 55%. They are. But when you look at the funding history on it, it may not be that they've paid what the actuarially required contributions were in prior years. Now, with the change in accounting standards, those have to be accounted for in a different manner, and the exposure has to be listed on your financial statements.
Okay, so just speaking for South Kingstown, right now, we're putting in, you said 11%. Is that our normal amount?
11.89%
11
on the teachers.
Is that to make up for shortfalls we've done in the past?
That 11.9 is a statewide, whether or not you're in Coventry or whether you're in Providence, if you're a member of the state retirement system as a teacher, it's 11.89%. That's 60% of the overall cost, where the state picks up the other 8.18%. So, but there was underfunding in the, I think, the early 1990s during the Dupree administration. There was underfunding that occurred where they didn't put the full contributions in. Some of that's going to come back to haunt us.
Yeah, that was just the state contribution. They deferred payment for 2 years. So part of their contribution is going to pay for that deferred payment for 2
Okay,
years.
but either way, when I say the state and the town are putting in 20% combined right now, that's not that far off from what it's been. I mean, you were talking a few...
It's actually been higher, but based on changes that they've made to the system as far as benefits and the reduction of those
Okay.
benefits, it has...
So my
come down.
original statement that that's a lot for an employer to be putting into a retirement plan, I don't think there's anybody in this room other than a state employee that would disagree with that.
Okay, but let's take it one step further. If you were dealing with a direct pension where you were giving somebody money to put into an IRA, from the first dollar that you give them, it becomes the employee's money.
That's the way it should be.
Under this plan, the contribution that the municipality is making, if that person leaves within the first 10 years, the only thing they're able to get back out of the retirement system is what they put in out of their own pocket.
Right, so the...
That money stays.
Right,
with
so the plan
retirement
is bad from both perspectives. It's bad from a employee's perspective, and it's bad from a taxpayer's perspective. So there's nothing good to be
I'm
said
not sure
about it.
anybody's going to say that the plan's bad from an employee perspective as far
If
as...
you
they-
leave
Well, if you leave early, right, so from that standpoint, it's bad.
Well, you're
Or
not
if you
employee
die
at that
early.
point.
If you die early, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole...
I'm just...
Anyway, I'm just saying, I made my point. I made my
Okay.
point. You can
but
beat me up with numbers all night long and you'll win, but...
But my point to you is, you can't just look at it and look at the numbers. You have to understand the numbers to see whether or not it's a good deal or it's not. And I'm saying that each system has its positives and its negatives. And unfortunately, only the negatives get brought forward in a lot of the discussions. And all I try to do is to add a little bit of both sides so that you can make a better decision as far as whether or not it's a fair deal.
Okay, well, just to,
And
not
I
to
sell
give you
used
the
cars
last
on the
word, but I don't, personally, I don't see any positives other than our town is not in the red, but as far as the spiraling cost of education in our town And with the declining enrollments, I mean, if you can put a positive spin on that by giving, you know, accounting numbers or whatever, fine. I won't buy that at any point in time. I think it's, the cost should be commensurate. I mean, there's an inflationary factor, but if you take the unions, all right, I have to go back to my notes here because I wasn't going to say this, but now I have to, I guess.
Can we keep it towards the South Kingstown School Fund? Because we still got other
Yeah, this
items
is
to
South
go.
Kingstown School Funds. I mean, basically speaking, it's time to play hardball with the NEA. Nobody in this room is willing to do it. And I mean, I don't like to use the word, but I'm going to say it. You guys are wimps. With a capital W.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Dwyer. I just want to kind of piggyback a little bit, but disagree a little bit. The state, the town, the school system, they're large businesses, is how we need to look at it. In a bad economy, in a suffering economy, everybody's suffering. I'm a small business owner, I'm suffering. I'm making cuts for certain things, increasing the health insurance co-pays. I've completely cut out my salary to keep my business afloat. No offense to any union member whatsoever, I don't get paid retirement. I don't get money put in for anything. And I know some of you might agree and some of you might not, but I think that cuts need to start from an individual perspective as far as the employment of people's salaries. I think it's crazy that in this economy there were raises. I think it's crazy to even think that they're still receiving compensations for retirement. We can't survive. We're talking about closing schools in an amazing town, which does affect the future, our kids, it affects. It affects the future of people coming here. Because I tell this story to people who want to move here, they don't want to move here. They're like, I don't want to go through this if this is what they're doing. There shouldn't be any cuts to music, there shouldn't be any cuts to this. And again, I really mean no disrespect for probably 70% of the people in this room. The cuts need to come from the employment first. That's my opinion only, but again, as a small business owner, that's what I need to do to stay afloat. This is a large business, that's what should be done. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Again, is there anybody else before a second speaker comes up? Because, okay, then after this we'll move on.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle. I think it's a little bit of an opportunity lost where a speaker came up and wanted to have a little more dialogue tonight. School committee meetings are now running to midnight. I don't have a problem with the discussion ending last night just before midnight. But there were probably 4 or 5 more people that wanted to speak. So, you know, now it's 9 o'clock. You got a pretty good crowd here. You got people on the stream, which the school committee meetings are not being streamed, so that it's really less available than the town council meetings. And I think when I'm looking at the agenda, it certainly seems like there's leeway to add additional discussion. Can't be voted on if I'm reading this correctly, but there is opportunity to add for additional discussion. Am I wrong with that?
For this evening, is that what you wanted?
Correct.
Jonathan, we're listening to the public, so you just stated that, so, okay.
Well, I mean, that's great. It's great that you're listening to the public. You want to share your thoughts? I mean, that's what, there's quite a few people that have said, you know, I'm sure that everybody here appreciates, and the people that are watching appreciate that you're listening. But you guys have the votes. So I'm going to say that I think the public is probably curious to know what you're thinking. I mean, I don't know if I'm missing something. And so I don't know if this is like we're starting to degrade democracy here, because I think that most of these agendas have a second item, other points of concern, or something like that, and I don't see that on here. So I don't know if that's not the case all the time, or if that's been removed, to discourage additional points to be brought forward. But it seems like it is your right to, and actually probably your responsibility to have this discussion at a decent hour, 9 o'clock, as opposed to midnight, and you can't finish the discussion. Okay, I guess I would like to hear our leaders talk about their thoughts on this different configuration, because I think there is great savings here, and I can't read minds, that's why it'd be nice to know what people think. But maybe the town council is not willing to give the school committee additional money because they're looking and saying that there's other configurations which will save more money. So maybe they're saying in their, in their minds, I don't know, I'm not hearing it tonight, we're not going to be willing to give the school committee more money because they're seems largely looking at configurations that will save smaller amounts of money when there are additional options available that would save larger amounts of money. So I think if the school committee would have a discussion about that in a general term, and again, no vote can be taken, where their thought is on that, then maybe the town council would have a more fuller understanding of what the thought process is, and you guys could kind of get together and figure that out a little bit. Right here, where you're all in the same room, it's a public meeting, you could have a nice discussion about what you want to do with our town. I think one of the, and I guess if that does happen, not holding my breath, but I think what I had heard from a number of school committee members was the reason, one of the main reasons behind the alternate configuration, which could save $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 and protect the community valued neighborhood schools and all the core programs, music, sports, and show a lot of respect to the taxpayer, was bonding issues, which I think has really been turned out to be a pretty negligible amount of money. That shouldn't keep it from happening. And also teacher certifications, which I don't think that we've really gotten a direct response on that, but we think, again, we're doing a lot of the work that I would think that the school committee would do, and that's maybe where some of the confusion comes from, is there's so much community work trying to find out what the details are, because the details aren't being really shared with the community. But the teacher certifications at the middle school, that they can teach at an elementary school, and we're hearing a number that it may be as many as 90% of the staff there at the middle school could teach in elementary school. So that, I think, definitive answer.
You want one you can paraphrase.
Well, that may be fair. But I think that you actually were in a section of the budget discussion that I wasn't in. I was really talking about the $1.2 million recommendation, and I think there's a nuance in here, because going to, I don't know how much you follow the school committee meetings, and again, I really don't want to paraphrase, and I can go back to the minutes. I don't know that I'll have time tomorrow before tomorrow's meeting, but I think I've heard from numerous times by the superintendent that based into her budget that she's put together is that she has heard from town manager and or town council that it's level funding. So I think it's been, the way I've heard it is that that's been,
I've said to you that I asked the school department to give a level funded budget. I've said that repeatedly. What I've said to you is I have never seen a superintendent's budget that was submitted to the school committee that was not adjusted in any previous years. Just as this budget was adjusted down, many budgets are adjusted down based on what the administrator requests to what the school committee believes is what they're going to put into their final budget document. And this year, the reason that we continued to look at flat funding for the schools was the case of the loss of the $2.1 million on the motor vehicles, because we're losing that money. We're going to get it back by charging what came to us as a revenue from the state is now going to get charged to the people. That's a tax rate increase that people are not going to see until they get their bill. So, and to be honest with you, it's in the email that I sent you, where I said to you there was not a cut of $1.2 million. So I've given you my answer verbally 3 times and on paper twice. I don't know how much more I can answer you.
okay, am I not allowed to email you with a question?
I I emailed you the answer, so I would think that you understood the answer, that I was.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that the budget that has been put together for the school committee to consider has been based upon hearing from you, whether, I mean, it's semantics to me, whether you're saying a demand, I mean, maybe it's not to you, but if they take it that it's a demand from you, okay, then maybe my quarrel is not with, and I don't even think I have a quarrel with you. I don't know if you have a quarrel with me.
I don't have a quarrel with anybody.
You never do.
He's a happy-go-lucky
You never
guy.
do. I love it.
Never does.
But that's, going to all these meetings, that's what I've heard that the school committee budget has been based upon, is hearing from you and/or the town council that money, they're not going to get any more money from you. So I think largely it's a matter of semantics, you know, and you may not agree with that, but if they're treating it as this is all it is and that they can't ask for more money, which I don't understand why they wouldn't if they feel like they need more and they're supposed to be running the best school program that they can, then the words you use, they're taking it the wrong way then, I guess. So I don't know that I'm the only one with a misunderstanding.
And I'll take that as a rhetorical question.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Angeli.
I just wanted to reply to some of that. I guess if I don't reply.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Is
I'm
it
sure
on?
it's on. Pull it towards you. The button.
Just
I'm
wanted
sorry.
to reply to some of that. I mean, I know if I don't, you know, I'm fearful of paraphrasing or there may be a reply that that I said that I didn't think I said, but I think it was pretty clear last night as to what the schedule is going to be moving forward in terms of having those detailed discussions. So I think it's somewhat disingenuous to come here tonight and expect that dialogue to happen when we said that last night it was going to happen on April 27th, when the superintendent has the opportunity to lay out her analysis. And I think the council president was clear in terms of what our function was here tonight. So I just wanted to reply to that, and I'm sure we'll see you on April 27th.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else on school fund? If not, we'll move on to the Peacedale office building. If anybody has any questions or concerns about that item, do we go through the budget? The Neighborhood Guild is next. The Water Enterprise Fund. Well, these are very interesting topics. Come and ask us. We spend a lot of time talking about. We've got people here from the staff too to address. Okay, the Wastewater Enterprise Fund. Okay, the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. That is a very good one. I don't know if anybody wants to come up. Okay. Can't live without that. The Senior Service Program. No? Are there any questions regarding the resolutions on the back page? Oh. Is that any people coming? No? Okay. Then at the end, that concludes, but I do feel quite amiss that I did not do the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you will bear with me, can we please end with the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you very much. I apologize for that. And so at that, this meeting is adjourned, and the time is 9:17. We will be here tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock for the second public hearing.